Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're going to be looking at the third Doctor story, The Daemons.
Mm.
This was the. Just checking this now. Yep,
It
the
was the
final
last story
story.
of season 8, was it?
Yep, the final
Yes.
story of season 8. Yep.
Yep.
Um. Okay, there it is. Yeah. It features quite a lot of. I'm gonna say for the time unique. Subject matter for the show. I might be
Yeah.
wrong about this, but it feels like that one of the first times that Doctor Who delved into the science versus magic element of science fiction in terms of, higher forms of technology being indistinguishable from magic, that sort of thing.
And how weird is it that the last story we looked at has similar elements?
Yeah.
And I swear to God, Cuff, that's just a coinky dink. I didn't plan that.
Oh no, 100%. But like a story like this really feels like a blueprint for something like Haunting of Villa Diodati,
Yeah.
or like Unquiet Dead or Shakespeare Code or anything like that that
Mm.
deals with more supernatural stuff in the future of the show. And obviously there are similarities that can be drawn to the Satan Pit.
Yeah. I think in terms of sort of mixing science, and superstition, or science and fantasy, want to say that's been done before this, but not, I don't think, to this extent. Because even in something like the Mind Robber, where we saw the Minotaur and Unicorn and the Medusa, that all had a concrete scientific explanation. That's not even that much of a surprise in that story. So I think this might be the most these sort of elements have come together.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading a bunch of the production notes on Wikipedia. Some of this
Hmm.
is really interesting, but
Oh
well,
yeah, there's some wacky behind the scenes stuff.
um, overall, I found this episode to be pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel like it deserved to be split across 5 episodes because quite a lot of it seems a little manufactured to get to that length.
Hmm.
Like the significant chunk of the story, the Brigadier, and the important unit technology is just separated from the story. Um, the Master goes into uh, the demon pit like 4 or 5 different times when it didn't really
Hmm.
feel that necessary.
Hmm.
There are certain elements of this story that do feel uh, a little weak and a little
Hmm.
loose.
Hmm.
But overall, I thought it was really solid.
Yeah, it's a very enjoyable story for me. I was pretty impressed by it. Um, I I understand what you mean about some of the plot, like it not being justified to be that length. That didn't bother me that much. I felt like even when the Brigadier and the unit are trying to break through the force field, that I was quite compelled by that. I found it to be quite interesting. Granted, the fact that the story, I mean, I wouldn't call it's not really a bubble episode, but the fact that you've got the Doctor and companions trapped in this place and you got them separated, maybe they could have done more with that, or I don't know. But generally, it worked pretty well. There's one particular plot element that I had an issue with, but we'll get to that later on. But generally, yeah, I certainly found this story to be quite entertaining.
Well,
Um,
I'll put it this way. You know how we sometimes have that little work of classic Who that we sometimes go, that I don't think that I buy into that. The whole
mm,
thing about with classic Who, sometimes you only really need to watch episode 1 and episode 5,
yeah, yeah,
the last
yeah.
one. This to me is like I almost buy that for this story. Like I feel
Hmm.
like if I only saw episodes 1 and 5, I don't think there'd be much in the middle that I missed
Hmm.
out on,
Hmm.
largely because like a lot of the explanations are given in that final episode, and I don't think there are many significant status quo changes in the middle.
I
Um,
guess so. I mean that the plot twists throughout, the middle parts of this story, they work well enough, but maybe you're right in that they only work because it's a serialized story and it's like, oh, here's this twisty cliffhanger, and does it work, overall, and like do all the moving parts work
mm,
cohesively? Um, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say if this is like an example of you only need to watch the first and last episodes. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, but I understand what you mean. I think there's a bit more substance to it. I certainly enjoyed a lot of this story, but I
As well.
understand what you mean in that it's not all quite coming together.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff in the middle three episodes is good, but I don't know how. Like, I don't feel like it's as point A to point B to point C to point D of a story as it could be. I feel like it is a
Hmm.
point A to point B, and then there's like a whole bunch of little ancillary points in the middle. That's
Mm.
my opinion.
Hmm.
But let's get to the timescales. Out of
Hmm.
180 votes, this has an average rating of 7.9.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, but that does seem a little high to me. I mean, basically being an 8, I mean, maybe a little high.
This
So.
is the one, two, three, four, five, eighth highest story of the Third Doctor run. It's right in the middle of Carnival of Monsters and the Sea Devils, which are both episodes we've examined in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you think that both Sea Devils and Carnival of Monsters are better than this, so you
I
know,
don't know. A Carnival of Monsters is definitely better than this.
yeah,
Sea Devils, I don't know. I think they're about even for me.
sure. Um, yeah, fair enough.
I don't know.
It's as I say though, I think that might be like 7.9. It might be a bit overrated for me, but like a 7 feels right. I mean, we'll see how I feel by the end of this story, this podcast, excuse me. But yeah, that's just preliminary thoughts, I guess.
Yep. It has a 7.8 for plot.
Um, Look, admittedly, before you pointed out what you just pointed out, I might have said, well, no, maybe not an 8, but I would have scored it around about there. But thinking it over, yeah, a lot of it is like they're fun moments in and of themselves, and the episodes like are relatively compelling. But as you say, does it all fit together? So maybe that's a little bit high.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
8.4 for acting. No one's bad in this. I think everyone's fine.
Yep. Good to see. Oh God, what's his name? I can't believe I'm forgetting this.
Stephen
The
Thorne.
guy. Sorry.
Stephen Thorne.
Yeah.
Yep. The
Seeing him.
he's Azal in this, or Azazel, or whatever, however you want to call him. He's the demon, and
Yeah.
he plays Omega in the Three Doctors.
Yeah. And he's great.
Yeah, he's fun.
Really,
He's
really
fun.
good fun. And yeah, there's not really any other weak performances. Even the side characters, the villagers are just they're kind of wonderful because they're sort of confounding, a little odd in the way that those sort of English country folk tend to be, like in shows from this period. So it's that's all good fun.
Yeah.
And the Brigadier and unit folks they're doing great. Um, love Miss Hawthorne, the local
Yeah,
witch.
she's fun.
She's really great as a character. We'll get into it later on. But yeah, like I can't think of really any performances. Even in the beginning, we've got the reporter and the really belligerent
Yeah,
archaeologist. I love those moments. They were so funny.
that's a good dynamic.
Yeah, it was very, 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 very funny. And the performances, I think, really are what sell those, those characters. So, yeah, I can't think of any really weak performances.
Okay, I needed to double check something just a moment.
Sure.
There's a unit scientist in this called Tom Osgood,
Yeah, oh, it's called Tom Osgood. Yeah.
and I was trying to find some connection to the character of Petronella Osgood,
Mm,
who was a more prominent figure in Moffat. Who
yeah.
um Moffat said that his intention was for Petronella to be Tom's daughter, but he didn't want to like define it in the script because he didn't want it to stand out for people who didn't know the reference.
Mm,
Um, it's more likely now that he is her uncle,
sure. Right.
which is just a fun little comparison to make. Like they've both
Yeah,
got
yeah.
really thick rimmed glasses, and there is a comic panel of Tom Osgood using an inhaler.
Mm.
which are both
Yeah,
things that are related to Osgood.
I I did know. Pardon me. I did notice the name. That was interesting. Um, yeah, I'd wondered. I thought, yeah, it seems like one of those things that Moffat would reference. So yeah, that's kind of neat.
7.5 for effects. There's some really classic Who special effects in this, which
Look, I
are
don't.
largely fun and fine and don't really like. The most obvious one is the green screen of Azal getting bigger.
I don't think they're that bad, and I think the way it also speaks to how those scenes are directed and edited, but I think it works
Sure.
convincingly enough. Like when you have the weird, intense close up of Azal's face, which is him, growing very quickly. That's actually handled kind of cleverly, and the way, again, it's edited and directed, it keeps that illusion up pretty well. And even when Azal gets defeated and he's, engulfed in this sort of pink light, that looks convincing enough, I
Yeah.
think, for the period. And it also sort of, as I've said before in the past about Classic Who, it fits with the over the top aesthetic, I think. So um, maybe there were moments where the green screen didn't look terribly convincing, but it wasn't that bad. Maybe because it's in a low lit environment, so
Sure.
it could
Yeah.
sort of hide some of the blemishes. And at the very least, I am positive we've seen worse. Maybe
Oh,
even
certainly.
we've seen worse on this podcast, and certainly in Classic Who overall, there are worse examples of green screen than
Sure. Yeah.
here. Also, and the practical effects are good fun. I love the shot of Bok reassembling after he
Yeah. Yeah.
he gets blown up with the rocket launcher, and that's such a great little
Yeah.
unit being defeated by
Yeah.
aliens
And
moment.
there is a yeah, that's true. But there is a really neat little set piece of the helicopter chase. Um,
Mm.
and what I initially thought was a spectacular piece of the BBC budget being used when the helicopter straight up blows up. As it
No,
turns
it's
out, that
it's
footage is
it's
from Russia with Love.
yeah, for an extra shot from a James Bond movie. But I mean, the fact that they make it work as well as it did is pretty good. Quite, I think, a testament to the innovation that you can expect from BBC shows.
Sorry.
um,
I've also just read because the end of the story features a church being blown up, and they use
mm,
models for this.
mm,
But apparently, and it slipped my mind as well because I think by that point I didn't really pick up on the fact that it looked pretty convincing. But
mm.
apparently, at the time, many viewers were led to believe that they actually blew up a church, and they got a lot of complaint letters about it.
God, that's funny.
So great.
That is very funny. That's yeah, that's kind of great if I'm honest. Um, but yeah, overall special effects they work well enough in themselves. Most of them are practical, and as I said, God, we've seen much worse.
Sorry.
So,
Holy. Okay, this isn't related to the effects, but the more I'm reading about this episode, the more I'm just fascinated by
hmm
70s culture. Um, so comedy actress Damaris Hayman starred throughout the 5 episodes as Miss Hawthorne in a
yeah,
central role. Hayman herself had an interest in the supernatural and helped out during production as an unofficial advisor. A friend of hers was a practicing witch who had commended the scripts for their accuracy. What accuracy? What the fuck are you talking about, friend of Damaris Hayman?
I guess I don't know, like the history of witchcraft and um,
I guess like the
even
portrayal of Hayman as a 70s
as yeah,
witch.
as a witch, yeah, or even
But I just love the idea of a friend of Hayman reading the scripts and going, yep, this all happened. I appreciate this.
I don't know, maybe there's a like the fact that the master is basically a satanic priest. There's
Maybe, yeah.
maybe it's speaking to the accuracy of how it. This is gonna sound so weird. The accuracy of how Doctor Who represents Satanism. That God, that's such a weird thing to say.
Yeah, I know.
But oh, only the best on this show.
This episode
Anyway,
has a replay value of 7.8.
um, uh, Again, my mind may change by the time we get to the end of this discussion. Maybe not quite that high. I think, for me, because I've watched it a few times in the last few weeks, it didn't get hugely better on rewatches, and there may even be some elements that are, of issue that I'm not quite appreciating. So yeah, that might be a bit high for me.
Sure. Let's do the synopsis. The Doctor becomes alarmed on seeing television coverage of an archaeological dig by Professor Horner into an ancient burrow near the village of Devil's End. He hurries to the scene with Joe. The Master is posing as the local vicar, Mr. Magister, and using black magic rituals to summon Azal, the last of a race known as the Daemons, whose miniaturized spaceship is buried within the barrow. Benton and Yates arrive in a unit helicopter, but before the Brigadier and his troops can join them, a heat barrier appears and cuts the village off from the outside world. Azar will appear 3 times, and on the last of these occasions will decide whether to transfer his awesome powers to another, or to destroy the planet as a failed experiment. The Master hopes to be the recipient of the powers, but in the event, Azal offers them to the Doctor instead. The Doctor declines, arguing that the human race should be allowed to develop at its own pace. Azal decides to kill him, but then Joe offers to take his place, and unable to comprehend this act of self-sacrifice, the demon self-destructs. The Master is finally captured by UNIT and taken away to await trial for his crimes against humanity. Which presumably leads into the Sea Devils next season.
Yes, I think. Maybe you can check. Was the Sea Devils the next story?
It wasn't the next story, but, and I'm just double checking.
Or was it Day of the Daleks that was next?
It was Day of the Daleks.
Yeah.
And then it was the Curse of Peladon.
Right. I think
and
there's.
then it was Sea Devil. So it was the next story to feature the Master, but it wasn't the next story.
Right. Okay. Yep. No, that makes sense.
Here's my main beef with this story. The ending seems to come down to a philosophical debate about the nature of humanity, and that isn't really supported by the rest of the script. Like, the story isn't about the Master corrupting humanity so that in Azal's eyes it's beyond redemption, so that Azal's can continue his mission by giving the Master his powers. And in fact, if the Master, like, there are elements of that in, like, the village of Devil's End,
yeah,
and corrupting those people, but like in the event that the humanity does get too bad, Azal destroys the planet, and that's not what the Master wants. The Master wants to get the powers so the experiment can continue. So by corrupting humanity, he's actually not working towards that goal. But like, yeah, so thematically, the ending doesn't really tie into much of the rest of the story, and story-wise, the Master's actions kind of go against his final plan. Am I wrong?
I mean, maybe. I think it's explored well enough. Like as you say, you acknowledge that there are obviously moments when the Master's with the villagers and he's either hypnotizing them or promising them riches and power, or just straight up, dominating and bullying them. But
because to me, it's like 4 whole episodes. It's a science versus magic story, and then for the last 15 minutes, it becomes a philosophical debate about the nature of humanity, and they don't really mesh.
I suppose not. I mean, yeah, I can't think of any concrete refutation of that. I think it certainly didn't bother me that much. I thought that there are other problems I have with the ending, and we'll get to it, but I felt like the themes themselves, they certainly were interesting enough, and I felt like they sort of tied in decently with the ending, but as you say, it's not. If that is a thematic concern in the story, maybe it should have been more prominent. Or maybe there could have been a way to tie it in with the science versus magic sort of a thing. I mean, I guess maybe the whole, these aren't actually your superstitions, they're scientific, and maybe that's trying to say something about it, but it's not quite sort of meshing together. If you wanted to say something about superstition versus, I don't know, like critical thinking, because the Master's essentially sort of leading like a cult, maybe there's something there, but
Yeah, and
um,
if any of that had been brought up in the final conversation with Azal, I'd probably be more willing to accept that, but it just isn't.
yeah, for me that I'm not bothered that much because I feel the fact like those elements seem implied in that conversation, and that's enough for me. But as you say, if it was really that important, why didn't they emphasize it and sort of bring it, sort of make it come around in that ending? So yeah, I mean, your concerns certainly make sense.
Um, I mean, the story's called The Demons. There's only one demon in it, so that's a very, very, very nitpicky thing. But
Mm. Yeah.
um,
That I'm not. Look, well, I mean, you could technically Bok. I think you could argue
well,
is a demon.
doesn't Azal like directly call himself the last of the demons or the last of his kind or something like that?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's obviously one of those classic, oh, the demons, what does this mean, sort of story title, which isn't quite,
Yeah.
you
But
know,
I do like the again, like I mentioned it before, like this setting up of the explanation of supernatural or fantasy elements by using sci-fi, like how they go through all the different horned beasts
yeah,
from throughout mythology and comparing them to the demons.
yeah, that was cool. Um, it's sort of similar to Shakespeare, and it's taking historical, um, sort of events and mythological concepts and putting a scientific explanation behind it, which is, um, quite interesting and something that's, I don't know if I'd say it's unique to Doctor Who, but it's something that Doctor Who does, I think, quite well. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I was trying to find yeah, so like Deimos is only mentioned like in one line in the Satan
Yeah.
pit because
Yeah.
in that episode they do like really heavily emphasize that all depictions of the devil across all of the universe stem from
The
uh
Beast. Yeah.
the beast, yeah. Um and but here it seems to imply that these figures are like like demons throughout history. I don't know how well that meshes.
Oh, I mean, I think it works well enough because it's like this is just human history. This is just human interpretations of this particular species, whereas the Beast is at the core of all, as you say, universal depictions of, um, darkness and evil and the void and things like that. So I
Sure.
think there's nothing in this story that I think really contradicts canon that even gets established later on.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it I don't think that's a huge problem.
No, me neither.
Hmm.
Ba, 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 ba. I don't have my main note about this story, and I wrote it down. Finally, the Doctor faces his greatest nemesis, Morris dancers.
Yeah, that
Like
was
that whole sequence I love because it's just it's so funny watching the Morris dancers be the most effective um Doctor fighting figures in this story.
hmm.
And it's just so like I really wanted to see the Doctor go Akira on these just regular villagers doing their little Morris dancing shtick.
Hmm.
Um, it's just funny.
It's the element of surprise, Cup. They caught him off guard because
They did catch you off guard. um,
it
but
it
like
it it is very fun. It must be
to
said.
me but to me that scene really feels like the narrative high point of the story, primarily because it does a better job, or for me at least, a better job bringing together all of the different elements it sets up.
Yeah,
Like it brings back Bessie, it brings up the science versus magic debate. It's
yeah,
about breaking the Master's control over the town.
yeah.
Um,
Critical thinking maybe versus superstition.
yeah,
Yeah.
critical thinking, that kind of thing. Yeah,
I
listening to
I
different opinions.
and the thing is like that bit where where the doctor and Miss Hawthorne convince the villagers that he's a great wizard, and you've got Benton with his
Long
handgun
barreled gun,
firing
yeah.
That is really, really funny.
It is.
I'd forgotten about that scene entirely because I think like I've seen the story like years and years ago, but it is wonderfully funny. But as you say, it actually is like it's more than that. It is actually quite dramatically effective and brings in all of these elements into this one scene.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, here's the thing as
so
well. Like, just get before like
mm,
the some of the opening scenes of this episode really caught me off guard because I there was
mm,
a point where I was perfectly willing to accept that Bessie was somehow alive. Because I don't know, I've never seen many stories with Bessie. So when she
mm,
started driving around on her own, and the doctor started going, "Now, Bessie, don't do that."
yeah,
I was perfectly willing to accept, oh, this is a similar kind of Time Lord technology, like how the TARDISes are alive. There's a bit of
yeah.
that in Bessie as well. And I was willing to go, I was genuinely about to like start this episode by going, why the fuck didn't you tell me Bessie was alive, Fitz? Um, but no, then it turns out he's got a little remote control, and I was like, oh, okay, very funny, Doctor. But then that ended up paying off, and I was like, oh, brilliant, brilliant, yes, I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and that really works. And I was going to say, like because you mentioned that there are some parts of the narrative that aren't super strong, but I was going to say, oh wait, but what about the whole confronting the great Qui Qui Quad scene? But as you pointed out, that's one of the stronger elements in this story. And again, I just God, that scene's funny. I love that scene so much, and it's one of those things where there's an element of silliness kind of inherent to it, but I think it's a sort of scene that you could only really get away with in Doctor Who, or at least that level of silliness. I think the fact that it works that well. I can't think of many other shows we could get away with something like that and make it work.
Ugh.
Um, so yeah, certainly, as you say, a highlight in this story. I found, and I expect you may agree, episode one was pretty strong.
I
Um,
agree, yeah.
I liked, the whole time limit thing. The Doctor's desperately trying to get to this dig site, and the villagers are just being annoying and not helpful. I mean, honestly, it a little bit. It almost has a Twin Peaks vibe in that these villagers are just doing their own thing.
A little
Um,
bit.
and the Doctor's just this almost like a Doc Martin character, or like a he's like a fish out of water. It's like, what the hell is wrong with all you people? Can someone please just tell me how to get to this place? But that bit, it's funny, of course, in its own way. But there is a sense of, I think, pretty strong narrative momentum in that first episode because we're rushing to get this thing, and then it ends on a pretty shocking cliffhanger. The Doctor almost seemingly dying, and I think even that cliffhanger, it gets worked out in the end fairly well. It doesn't feel cheap. It's not one of those, oh, here's this terrible threat, but actually it's only this. It's not like a fake out or something. So yeah.
But even then, I'm like, the Doctor is he's out of action for like at least the first third of the next story.
Mm.
Is there anything that is able to be accomplished by the Master because the Doctor's out of action? Like, is his inactivity in any way important to the story? I don't think it is. I think it's just he's not there for a bit. Other characters do stuff, and then he comes back, right?
Well, maybe he knows that the Doctor, because he's among other things, like he's a good speaker. He's obviously smart and shrewd. Like maybe the Master just thinks, oh, the Doctor being out of action generally, that can only help me because I don't have anybody to talk to these villagers. I don't have anybody to interfere with my plans or to see what I'm doing. I've got nobody to talk to the demon, which basically proves to be one of the Master's downfalls in the end. So maybe that's the justification there. It's that, and that's enough for me to believe it. But did they make that clear enough? Perhaps.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird one because like
Mm.
I that for me was one of the few moments where the practical effects made it kind of unclear what was going on because I was initially like, oh, he's being crushed under rubble, but then at the start of the next episode, he's frozen to death
Yeah,
almost.
I wasn't sure about that either. That admittedly, yeah, maybe it is one of the problems with the special effects or the direction and editing for that matter. But I was confused. I wasn't sure, and it wasn't until I watched it a second time. I was like, oh, okay, it's like a flood of freezing cold water, I
Oh, is
guess.
that what
And
it's meant to be?
I think
Okay.
that's what it looked like on a second viewing. And the thing is, even conceptually, like I could believe that works. Like if we've got these, you know, powerful beings that can do things that seem like magic, it's not impossible that they have that as a kind of a booby trap to, ward off
Yeah.
invaders. But as we've both sort of said here, they don't really make it clear what that is. It's just like explosion happens, and then next episode, oh, he's frozen, I guess.
Hmm. Um.
Also, by the way, just on a sort of a similar note, I don't know if this is the first time. I don't think it is, but this is I think an early reference to the fact that the Doctor has two hearts.
Oh, is it?
I don't know for sure, but I can't think of any other distinctive moment before the story where that's established. Yeah. Hmm?
I'll see if I can find it. Oh, no, apparently, this was first established in Spearhead from Space.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'd believe that.
Cool. But that was still a fairly new concept. It was only the season prior, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Um. So, should we talk about Joe?
yeah, let's do that.
I like that she gets the hero moment at the end of the story. I like that it's her action that um not gets through to Azal, but is able to get around him, and like the moment of pure um selflessness and empathy is able to defeat the creature of logic.
I guess so. I'm like, again, I have another problem with that ending, and we'll get into it in more detail. But that moment seemed a little cheap to me. I felt like,
Well, maybe that's because it's not a huge focal point in the rest of the story, right? Again, like if the rest of the
hmm,
story had been more about weighing up the nature of humanity and like are they worth saving, and then having a human risk themselves for someone
yeah,
for no reason, for no tactical advantage, that could have been a thing where Azal goes, that doesn't make any sense. I
yeah,
thought you were beyond redemption. I guess there are good in you after all, but you're also bad people. I can't compute this. And then
yeah,
explodes
sure.
itself. Like that's more what I'm trying to get at when I say
Yeah,
that
no,
the ending
no, no,
doesn't
that
really
makes
fit.
sense. That makes sense. And you could have even layered that into Joe's character specifically. Maybe she could have challenged the Doctor about assumptions he has about humanity, stuff like that. But that never really happens.
No,
And the
but
fact,
it is in keeping with her characterization of wanting to help. Like that's pretty much one of her inconsistent characterization across this entire thing. Like she wants to rush back into the chamber to try and help the Doctor despite
that,
the danger. Like that, it's consistent characterization, and I do like that for her because otherwise she doesn't have a lot to do in this story.
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, that's true, but I feel like it means that she lacks a bit of depth in this story. And I
Agreed.
don't know if you could, like, she seemed to have more depth in even Carnival of Monsters. So here, that ending, I understand the idea behind it, and I can appreciate its merits, but that moment and her characterization overall, it just feels kind of cheap to me. Um, and that's not even. There are other elements to dissect with Joe's characterization here, but overall, it's certainly a weaker Joe story and a weaker companion story, I think. I had wondered in a way whether that's because you've got the character of Miss Hawthorne, who seems to be more active in certain parts of the plot, even if it doesn't all fit together. But she's the one sort of helping rescue Sergeant Benton.
Well,
She's the one who.
you've also got Benton and Yates
Yeah,
separated
that's
from the
true.
rest of the unit people, and are basically just regular civilians with guns throughout
Yeah,
most of that story. They're largely taking on traditional companion roles there as well.
yeah, for sure. It might have been just an issue of too many talking heads. So, and don't get me wrong, I love Miss Hawthorne as a character. I think she's really cool and weird and interesting, and the fact that she can resist the Master's hypnotism is really cool as well.
Yeah,
But because
yeah.
of
Is
that,
that ever like given an explanation? I thought that would somehow lead because you know how like the
hmm,
justification often in modern Who for people having telepathic abilities is like so born on a rift in time and space, or that kind of thing. I was waiting for something like that with Miss Hawthorne, but we don't get anything like that. I assume she's just that strong-willed that she's able to resist it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the implication as well. But in a way, this goes to your issue. It would have been interesting to expand on that a little more. Is there, um, could you bring that into the theme of, I don't know, like critical thinking or breaking through superstition? But she's also superstitious, and there's interesting thematic concerns there that don't really get explored that much. Still really cool that she does it though.
Yeah,
But the upshot of all of this is Joe really, I think, just gets I
she
don't
gets
want to say
sidelined.
it. Yeah, she gets sidelined a lot, and I don't want to say it, but she, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but she feels like she's playing a sort of the damsel in distress role a little bit more so than I'm comfortable with for a number of reasons.
Um,
Um, I think her sacrifice near the end, it is interesting, it's cool, but even that felt not terribly deep or nuanced. And it's after she um basically gets sort of trapped and kidnapped. So that's a little bit frustrating. The other
I'm right.
issue,
See,
sorry, go ahead.
real quick. I don't think there's a single companion that wouldn't have done that in that situation, though. Which to me, I don't.
Well, yeah, no, that's true. You're right to say that. I mean, if there is a companion that didn't do that, they'd be rare and be a bit of a different characterization.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the issue is not so much the moment itself, but the fact that it's not backed up by a lot of strong characterization elsewhere. The fact
Well,
that,
yeah. Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's in the, like, I understand it and it's cool, but she almost seems to be used as just sort of a thing to get the plot from one place to another. And that's just a little bit frustrating to me. The fact that there's not a lot to back up this characterization, I think, is really
Suppose
what
you're
bothers
right.
me.
She did kind of pull a Rose in this story, so
Yeah,
I get that. Yeah.
yeah. So that was frustrating. The other issue, and I talked about this to you privately, that there are some. I'll just say it how it is. Uncomfortable interactions that she has with the Doctor and some of the other men in this story that seems kind of, sexist in any modern lens. The fact that the Doctor is really being quite shitty to her. It's like, oh well, really, Joe, did you fail Latin as well as science? I'm like, really? I mean, does he have to be that shitty about it? It does
Yeah.
sort of get rectified a little bit in the end because Joe's like, oh well, how can you understand? How can you fight something without understanding? And the Doctor's like, very good, Joe. I'm like a scientist of you, and it just feels,
A lot of
and
it is very patronizing.
yeah, it's uncomfortable, it's dumb, and it's very, and I know we say this a lot, but it is just a classic example of the show not aging terribly well. But as I said when we discussed similar things with the Shakespeare Code, that doesn't make it okay. I think it's important to be aware of that. I think at least, and
Yeah.
all of this sort of I wouldn't say passive characterization, but maybe the slight lack of characterization and the sexist way she's treated in the narrative, it all for me culminates in the one scene when after she gets knocked on the head, she's lying in bed recovering, and she's getting up and feeling distressed and saying, "Oh no, I've got to save the doctor." They just immediately give her a shot and sedate her, you know, just because I don't know, she was being hysterical, and we can't have that, we've gotta. Oh god, and that just makes me uncomfortable. I'm just gonna say it. It really does. It yeah. And then later on, when I think it's Benton or it might be Yates who just when she runs off, he just goes, "Oh, the little idiots," and I'm like, Jesus Christ, guys, really?
Yeah, there is quite a lot of people calling Joe an idiot.
Is that what is that what we're doing? Is that does she not matter to the writers
I'm
more than that? It just.
sure. Here's the thing: the moment where
Mm,
she gets sedated, I don't know what. I don't think like when you were describing that to me off mic. I it didn't really. I couldn't remember the moment. And looking it up
mm,
now, that's when she's sort of like tossing and turning, and like she's like half awake, and she's almost like feverish in that moment. So
Yeah.
that to me almost felt like they weren't like, okay, you're being a hysterical woman, let's put you
Mm.
back under. That felt more to me like you're unwell and you've got maybe even a concussion at this
I
moment.
guess
Let's
so.
put you back under.
I think, and that did come to mind as well, because again, I've watched the story a couple of times. It was worse, I think, maybe the first time, but then after
Sure.
watching it, I'm like, okay, I can see the justification. That being said, the fact that that even needed to happen at all in the narrative,
Oh yeah, there was no
there
reason
is,
for it.
yeah, there's still an uncomfortable element to that, and maybe it's because, admittedly, maybe this is a personal thing, maybe because I'm chronically ill and I've had a lot of blood tests and stuff. Maybe there's a sensitivity there coming in, but I just look at that and think, was that the best way they could have handled that? Were they really thinking that through when they wrote this? Because it just doesn't seem so. And at the very least, that scene in the way it's constructed and the fact that it's in the plot at all, I can't imagine that happening in a revival whose story like that. I mean,
It's
maybe I'm
very
wrong, but
irrelevant. Yeah.
yeah, it just. Also, there's one line that the doctor says that I do also want to highlight. There's the bit where the doctor basically says to Rose, jeez, to Joe. God help me. He says to Joe, oh, and given that the brigadier is your superior, I would think you might want to at least show him a little bit of respect. Now, maybe I'm wrong here, Cuff. Maybe you have got a different view here, but I find it difficult to imagine a revival who doctor saying that,
I
especially.
certainly, I certainly find it hard to imagine any doctor having that much respect for military hierarchy.
Yeah, especially given that I think it was in maybe even the last season, or yeah, no, the last season was Doctor Who and the Silurians, in which the Brigadier, I think, essentially commits basically genocide, and the Doctor is very critical about that in the end. So you'd think if there was going to be a character who's not fond of the military-industrial complex, even if he's working for them, it's going to be the Doctor. So
Yeah.
that was a little weird. I just can't
Well,
imagine a revival who Doctor saying something like that.
what was the
Um,
context in which he said that to her? Like, so the
oh, it
brigadier
was
had said like a plan that he had or something like that, and then
yeah, no,
Joe
no,
was like,
no. It was Joe. So the doctor got frustrated at the brigadier for coming up with an ulterior plan. He's like, Lethbridge Stewart, you'll do no such thing. And he's basically criticizing the brigadier and saying, we need to do, the smart thing. And then Joe, I think, basically agrees with the doctor and says, yeah, like, what a ridiculous idea. And the doctor's like, look, Joe, the brigadier's handling this situation in the best way that he can. And given he's your superior, I thought you might at least show him some respect. And I'm just like,
or like
mm,
without that last bit, I could appreciate that moment as a sort of like a character building thing for the Doctor. Like, whereas like, despite the fact that he and the brigadier might disagree, he has like a respect for like his like his motivation and his resolve and his like
mm,
at the very least his like intention of doing the right thing for the people he's trying to protect. Like,
mm.
that could have been that, but then like to tack on this really bizarre thing of like shooting Joe down and
Yeah. And also, yeah, like, I think the thing that, like, apart from the fact that there is just an uncomfortable quality to that line, the thing that I think shocked me about it most was the Doctor's not really a person who respects authority that much. So I'm
no.
not quite sure why he's saying this. I mean, and I said that, I can't imagine a revival who Doctor saying something like that. Maybe 13 in a way, given that she defended, basically corporate greed as just, oh, they're just, couple of dumb, silly little individuals. Don't worry, guys, the system works. But one, that doesn't make it okay, and two, beyond that, I really can't imagine a revival who Doctor saying something like that. I
No.
certainly can't imagine, for instance, 12 saying something like that.
Oh,
So,
absolutely not.
so that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And also, like, even in comparison to classic doctors, and even the third Doctor, that seems a bit out of place, because even if the Doctor has a bit of begrudging respect, not just for the Brigadier as a person, but even for
His methods.
and his station in, as a military man, um, it's never that overtly positive. There is still a bit of that tension. Again,
Hmm.
the Brigadier, this is the guy who bombed the shit out of the underground Silurian settlements. So unless there's some sort of character growth that I'm not aware of, that doesn't make a lot of sense logically. And even if there was character growth, it doesn't stop it from being weird and uncomfortable. So
I agree.
that line really did just stick out to me. I'm like, what are we, what are we doing here, guys? That just,
Yeah, no, I agree.
what's going
That's a bit.
on?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like there are various isolated moments that combined don't paint an amazing picture.
Yeah, it's a bit of a death by a thousand cuts situation. It doesn't, and look, it doesn't ruin the episode for me. It doesn't, like there are a lot of other elements in the story that I really enjoy, but it just, it's noticeable. It was noticeable to me, I think, even on a first watch. So I think that says
Mhm.
quite a lot about how all of these things sort of come together.
Um,
Um,
moving on, I always had a bit of a laugh whenever Bok appeared. Like, 'cause it's not one of their best costumes, but not even that. But like the way that the actor inside was portraying Bok moving around like they were like desperately trying not to wake their parent, like sort of like
yeah, no, 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 no.
arms up, sort of moving around like they were Lego underneath their feet. It was always just a bit
Here's
funny
a
to me.
question: would you say that Bok has a bit of a Scooby Doo villain vibe?
Oh, absolutely! Like I can just imagine like that, like the Scooby Doo Hanna Barbera tiptoe sound effect.
Yeah, yeah.
Whenever Bok moves, it fits perfectly.
Yeah. And when you think about it, like there is a slight menace to his presence, but it's mainly done through the sound effects of his voice. If you like,
Mm.
can you imagine if you watch the scene where you first see Bok entering the cave? If you didn't have that terrifying roar, like how would you react to that character?
Oh, I'll tell you exactly how I react to that character with laughter. That's
Yeah.
like that entrance was not a particularly strong first impression at least for me, because I just found that funny. Um,
Yeah.
I was able to like by episode 3, I was able to be like, okay, this is the character, this is what they're trying to go for.
Yeah, you
It's
get
it's
used to
it's,
it.
clear, it's clearly like a gargoyle esque
Yeah.
stone thing come to life. I can appreciate that.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to play up the sort of imp, sort of goblin
Yeah,
vibe, but they're doing it a bit too much. I mean, God, the goblins in the Church on Ruby Road seemed a bit more menacing than Bok did, so that should tell you something.
I also
Um,
appreciate
and Bok didn't even have a weird song
yeah, yeah.
involved, so
There's also I like the consistency with how Bok attacks and then also the heat shield. Like they clearly work in very very similar ways,
mm,
which I think is it's nice to have that internal consistency. Like it's a small thing, but there's a lot of Doctor Who stories that don't do that, where it's like these different elements of the same group of attackers work in different ways. When
mm.
it makes a lot more sense to do it this way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, and speaking of the heat shield, that was a bit of special effects that I think was handled
It's really
fairly
nice.
well.
Yeah, I really liked
The
it.
like the way the shield like just looks like when you see the big exterior shots, but also when the Brigadier is holding out
Yeah,
his riding crop and it just sort of ignites. Like that was done pretty
it's
well.
really
It
really
all must be
effective.
said.
Yeah, I quite
Um,
like it actually.
so yeah, so that was pretty good. I want to go back to Joe for a second
Oh yeah,
because
sure.
this is the other big thing that I had with it. I actually that ending, the way that it culminated, that was probably the weakest element in the story for me. And the reason why was because as Azal says, oh, you're not acting logically, this doesn't make sense. Oh, my internal clock is being ruined, I'm being destroyed, help. Um it in a way reminds me of when the Dalek at the end of Remembrance of the Daleks explodes, or
Mhm.
even Light in Ghostlight, the fact that he
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
understand. But it doesn't work as well here, I think, because right before makes her sacrifice, the Doctor acts in a way that Azal doesn't consider logical. Like he says, he is not rational. He is a nuisance. Well, if the Doctor isn't rational and is a nuisance, then why is Joe being not rational? Why is that a problem suddenly? Like, what does that
I mean,
like? Is it
maybe it was.
specifically because of it's part of the experiment, or is it
I
it
think
just didn't?
maybe. I think it's either a because the Doctor isn't human and therefore not part of the experiment,
Mm,
or B, it might be the 1-2 punch of both people being irrational right after, like one after the other. Might
Well,
have
in a
done it.
way, this kind of goes to your main issue. Maybe the implication is that Azal's understanding of human nature is that it is just a failed experiment, that there's something, I don't know, innately corruptible, or there's something innately ignorant or useless about humanity, and this sacrifice seems to not. It seems to bulk against that, but they don't make that clear enough because it doesn't, as you say, thematically fit in with the rest of the story. So maybe that's the key issue, but either way, that for me was like the definitively weakest part of the plot for me. It just didn't really work. Which was annoying because I certainly before we had this discussion, the rest of the plot for me worked quite well, and that confrontation with Azal was really good. I quite enjoyed it. It just that one moment, and it's unfortunate because it's the climax. It can't really afford to be weak, and the fact that it
Yeah,
is, it just doesn't quite sit right with me.
I know.
Which was
I think I think I can reason it enough that because the Doctor isn't part of the experiment, it doesn't affect us all like it does when Joe does it. That
yeah, I
to me,
guess so.
I can easily buy that. To me, that moment of self-sacrifice, it doesn't like in terms of the overall narrative. Yeah, it's a horrible conclusion, but in terms of just the conversation between the Doctor, the Master, and Azal, for me, it works perfectly fine. I don't really have a problem with it. Also, just
Mm.
giving Joe something to do and being the key figure in the end, I think it doesn't make up for the previous 5 episodes of her not doing much and treating her like
Mm.
shit,
Mm.
but it's nice
It's
to give her
something.
that.
Yeah, I guess so.
And there is like that small exchange between the Doctor and Joe at the end where like he's treating her a little bit better there, and like they
Yeah,
have like smiles and like it's fine.
yeah, I guess so. It just, yeah, it was just tripping, tripping off the logic sensors in my brain, I guess, when I was watching it in preparation for this podcast. So, yeah,
Mm.
it still bothers me, but I can understand what you mean. Um, do you want to talk about the Master?
Yeah.
Um, I'm just gonna say this. I enjoy the Master in this story, but this feels like not a full blown really really weak master story, but I'm surprised how weak of a master story it is, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it might be because a lot of the best Master stories feature quite a lot of Doctor Master interaction, because that is
Hmm.
one of the most interesting parts of his dynamic.
Yeah.
And there's just not a lot of that in this, and it just feels like a pretty standard like he's doing his thing where he's controlling people and he's trying to gain more power to try and enslave the planet. Like it's just a very standard Master plot, and also I think a big part of the reason for that is that the Master had been in every single story of this season of TV. So
Yeah.
like they were clearly running on fumes with stuff for him to do, and it
Yeah.
was just like he's the villain of the season.
Mm.
We got to use him like to
And
the fullest extent.
yeah, I guess it makes sense, and I suppose he's also he like they have to make room for the other villains, right? They have to
Yes,
make
yeah.
room for the demons themselves. So the fact that he gets relegated to a, almost like a sidekick or something, it does make sense. It just seems a little odd because we're used to seeing the master as, the master, the great puppet, the puppet master, the manipulator.
Mm.
And there is some of that here.
Well, he almost
But
does it as well. Like if not for Joe's sacrifice, he would have succeeded at being the puppet, even regarding Azal. Like
yeah,
Azal was like moments away from granting the Master his power,
yeah.
so it
Um,
almost paid off for him.
yeah, I guess so. But maybe it's also the fact that it's basically implied that Azal as a demon has more power than the Master or the Doctor, and maybe even the Time Lords generally. So the
Yes.
Master being sort of more subservient in that scene, that it works, it makes sense, but
Mm.
maybe just to me it seemed a bit odd because we're not used to seeing the Master like that. It's quite
I don't know. Like for me, there was
interesting.
cause, like there are shades of that in that conflict, but also there's quite a few moments where he is being his like demanding self, where he
Oh
straight up uses
yeah,
Poe's demand and command Azal to like um to do what the Master wants. In fact, there are several sound bites from this story that come up in Utopia later on in season
Mhm.
3 when we hear like snippets of the Master from the Pocket Watch. Like there
Mm,
are clips from this story that are directly used, and
right.
I recognized them instantly as I heard them. I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And that makes sense because when he's with the villagers, he's using his charisma and his hypnotic ability to control these people. I guess it makes sense. It just seemed odd to me. Not bad, just odd. Um I think given that this isn't like a very, I suppose, master prominent episode, or at least not as prominent as he is in other stories, it still makes sense because again, you've got to make room for the demons
Yeah,
themselves as the main threat. Um, he's you could argue. No, I don't think this is entirely true, but to an extent, he sort of works as just a sort of a catalyst to get things going because he's the one who summons the demons. But there's also a bit of thematic complexity. The fact that, the Doctor compares him to Hitler, for example, because he's being more like Hitler. You know,
well, yeah, and Hitler is directly referenced in this story.
yeah,
The
funny.
Doctor directly draws a parallel between the Master's actions and Adolf Hitler and Genghis Khan.
Mm.
That genuinely caught me off guard there. Like, I thought they were just going to leave it unsaid, but then John Pertwee says Hitler, and I'm just like, whoa, Jesus! You went there in 1971.
Mm.
In 1971, they went there.
Yeah. Wow. Also, actually, on a sort of related note, when the master says there's, oh god, you know what? I'm going to get this up because I did write it down. Just give me a minute.
Yeah. While you're
Uh,
doing that, I just want to again point out 1971. Hear that, everyone?
mm-hmm.
What 53 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's when the show went woke, you motherfuckers.
Mm. Okay, I'm going to read this out. So the master says, all this talk of democracy, freedom, liberty, what this country needs is strength, power, and decision. Now, I point that out because it sounds eerily similar to that thing that Davros said in Genesis of the Daleks, when he said,
Mm.
they speak of democracy, freedom, fairness, those are the creeds of cowards, that line. And I just find that
Yeah.
interesting. Because this story came first, and I
Yeah.
don't doubt that that's not like the fact that there's similarities between those lines. I don't think that's deliberate in any way, but it's just interesting. I guess it shows the thematic concerns of British sci-fi writers in the 70s.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's interesting actually because like given how much of especially classic era master, but to a certain extent revival era master as well, given how much the master does want to like basically rule over humanity a lot of the time, I've never really drawn that comparison to the character.
mm,
And I don't know why, but like to me, like the Hitler analog or the fascism analog with in Doctor Who has always been the Daleks and
yeah,
Davros.
yeah,
And the Master to me has always been like the main comparison to people draw to the Master is always the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock.
yeah.
And
Like
it's never the it's never a World War II fascism comparison between the two. It's never
maybe,
like a
maybe,
Hitler and Churchill comparison, for example.
yeah, maybe it's because with the master, there's more an implication that like yes, he's obviously a very domineering person, and he probably does view all other forms of life as inferior to him. But for him, it's more just like a pure ego thing. Like he just loves like being in power
You
and
know what?
being the master.
That's absolutely it. Like even
Yeah,
in a lot of the conversations in this, it's never about like he doesn't really reference like a subjugation angle or a they're beneath me. It's always a I'm superior or
yeah.
like I'm the best or like I'm top dog. It's never
Whereas,
about
mm,
other people being like inferior or heathens or you
yeah,
know mongrels as Cassandra might say.
yeah. Like whereas with Davros, there's that clear. I don't know. Like there's a clear ideology, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe that's the
That
difference.
might be it, yeah.
Um, but yeah. Either way, Doctor calls him Hitler, and he says some very, very fascist statements. I
Hmm.
think in this story. So
He does, yeah.
interesting, isn't it? Funny. Anyway, now that we've moved on from our weekly segment,
Yep. Um Do you have any more notes? I'm almost tapped out, I think.
um, interested, interest, yeah. Interestingly, Guy Leopold was a pseudonym for the writers Robert Sloman and Barry Letts, who worked on a number of other um
Oh.
Doctor Who stories. I think they wrote. I might just look this up actually. Just give me a moment. Barry Letts also produced this story. But he was a director, writer, and producer in a number of Doctor Who stories. But he wrote a lot of them with Robert Sloman, who it looks like with a lot of these stories they weren't credited, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did the Daemons, the Time Monster, the Green Death, Planet of the Spiders, and he was a script consultant for some story called Deimos Rising, which I assume is like a big Finnish story or maybe a book. Um,
Presumably, yeah.
yeah, and he produced a lot. Yeah, he produced Doctor and the Silurians, Ambassadors of Death, Terror of the Autons, which I'm pretty sure is the first Master story, so that's interesting. Um, and also, he directed Inferno episodes 3 to 7, uncredited, but still, that's interesting. And produced Inferno. Anyway, yeah, that's just a little tidbit. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, there was a reason why they chose the pseudonym, and it's not that's been done before. Um, I mean, I don't know if literally before this story was written, but it's been done in other times in Doctor Who. I'll just look up and see if there's any kind of in
Well,
the
actually,
notes. Hmm.
I just want to call attention.
Hmm.
Um, when they're fighting Bok and they're not getting anywhere,
Hmm.
The Brigadier says the line "Chap with the wings there, 5 rounds rapid."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and 5 rounds rapid is the official name of a trope on TV tropes. Where military personnel or police encounter the monster and their gunfire doesn't work on them.
Yeah. And apparently that's meant to be like it's a really iconic line for the Brigadier. I think it
Yeah, and
says in these notes.
I'm
So.
yeah, I'm looking for the different times he said it. Um, I know it's something that Kate says in the Zygon inversion, and that's
Hmm.
clearly a reference to the
Yeah. Yeah.
demons, which is nice. I did recognize the words when the Brigadier said them in this, but I didn't know this was actually the physical name of the trope. Like it's the
Hmm.
official name of what that is. So well done, Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who.
Hmm.
I think it's a badge of honor to be a trope name on TV
Hmm.
tropes.
For
So well
sure.
done, Brigadier. You got that honor.
Hmm.
I'm just fascinated that that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, a
It's
couple
all
of
very
other things. When
interesting.
the Master is doing his incantations, um, do you know what the incantation is? What he's actually saying?
Um. No, I've heard some of it.
It's
Um.
Mary had a little lamb backwards.
Really?
Yep.
That's interesting.
it's it's saying Mary had a little lamb, or as in the nursery rhyme, not those words, but backwards.
Yeah.
It's great.
That is that is funny. There's a bit where the Doctor, um, when he says sort of the Venusian lullaby while holding the iron, the knife in front of Bok. Those words that he's saying are the same ones that he sings when he tries to calm down Agador when they meet him in Curse of Peladon and the Monster of Peladon. So
Hmm.
that's interesting.
Also,
Um,
5 Rounds Rapid is the name of Nicholas Courtney's autobiography.
oh, that's great. That is great.
Yeah.
Very funny. Um, yeah. Uh, yeah. I think that's it. I can't
Cool.
think of
Yeah,
many other things. I
I'm.
mean,
We've covered all of it.
oh, and I guess I meant we did talk about it. I guess, but Benton and Yates, it's a pretty good episode for them. It's quite,
Yeah,
um,
I like that they each get their own stuff to do.
yeah.
Which I was initially like, oh, you've got 2 unit personnel here. Well,
Mm,
I wonder if it could have worked with just one. But no, they both have
mm.
their own roles to play.
And I also love the just the little interactions, like when they're watching. Is it the cricket they're watching? I think
It's football.
early on. Sorry,
It's football.
football. Right. Yeah, that's just kind of fun.
Yeah, it's great that they miss the inciting incident because they were too busy yelling at the ref. It's really great stuff.
Yeah. And also uh, the fact that they incorporated the BBC into the story, which is not surprising. It's really
No.
not, but it's just really funny and entertaining. And as I said, I love that host and the interactions he has with the archaeologist. It's so very very funny. Um, and like I know, like, it really shouldn't be that surreal because it's been done. I mean, I'm not sure before this, but certainly would be done later, having sort of the meta element of real world stuff coming into the world of Doctor Who. But it's like when Bench is like, "Quick, get onto the BBC and tell them to," it's just funny, I guess.
What function was the Brigadier going to when he was dressed like a toy soldier at the beginning?
I'm not sure.
Because
Yeah, I'm not sure.
he's dressed in a full-on like, oh, it's almost like a marching band
Hmm.
jacket and a bow tie,
I
and
thought
then
that
he
is that
wakes
the
up
first
later on
time.
in.
Right, I thought the first time we saw him was when he was like waking up in bed. I thought maybe I'm wrong though.
No,
Um,
he was clearly going to some kind of function.
right.
I'll figure this out. I want to see what it is.
Hmm.
It's it just says a function in on the TARDIS wiki. There's
Right.
no reference to what it is. It's
Sure.
clearly just the episode was like, we need to figure out why the Brigadier is out of action for the start. I don't know. Let's put him in a marching band outfit and have him wake up in bed later on. I mean, it works, but
Hmm.
I just find it interesting. Like, I don't
It
think
is.
he's getting like a commendation for dealing with the Autons. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yep.
I think I've said everything. Um, oh, and as Miss Hawthorne, I think is a great character. She's very fun.
Yes.
Love interactions, especially when the Doctor's get other stances. It's all just really wonderful. Um, yep. I think we're good.
I'm giving this story a 7.
Yeah, I'll give it a 7 too. Flaws here and there, and maybe the narrative doesn't come together as well as we might like. But like even individually, like the Sims themselves, I think are quite entertaining and despite some of the issues I have with the story, it's still pretty good.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So next time we will be examining the story Gridlock, which, in my opinion, at least from memory, is kind of underrated.
We'll see how it goes. I
But
don't
we'll see.
remember a lot
Yeah.
of it. I remember the macro show up again, but
Yeah, well, to be fair, in one of the most underwhelming classic era villain returns of all time,
hmm.
the macro appear. Uh, but until then, I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and
Mary had a little lamb.
Lamb Little. Okay, well, I was trying to. It's Lamb Little had Mary. Is that Mary? Yes, it is. I'm not going to do. I'm not going to attempt the reverse the tape version of that.
Funny.